Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and our main topic tonight, Israel's financial future. The government recently announcing its latest plans to deal with the exorbitant and rising cost of living here in the country. This after suffering years of economic instability, repeating elections, leaving the country without any meaningful state budget, and the coronavirus pandemic, including several nationwide shutdowns, further crippling the economy. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett then now unveiling the early tenets of his proposal to further open the economy and to introduce more competition and ease the burden on low-income taxpayers.
במשך עשרות שנים הכלכלה הישראלית סובלת ממעכבי תחרות, כל מיני פטנטים שנועדו להגן על קבוצות לחץ מסוימות ולמנוע תחרות בריאה שתקל על יוקר המחיה של רוב הציבור. המטרה שלנו, שרי הממשלה, היא לפתוח. זה לוקח זמן, שכנוע ומציאת פתרונות, אבל רוב הציבור מצפה שנעשה את זה, נותן לנו רוח גבית ומצפה לראות תוצאות.
Joining to discuss is value creation expert with the Academic College of Tel Aviv Jaffa, Dr. Alex Coleman, and Professor Benjamin Bental, principal researcher and chair of the Taub Center's Economics Policy Program. Thank you both so much for joining us now. Professor Bental, I'll start with you. One of the main tenets of this new plan is that it eases the burden on working parents, so to speak, quote-unquote working parents. But this is at the same time excluding the elderly, singles, or still childless couples. So why the focus here and not on a lot of other people who in Israel are at great risk? They're below the minimum wage. They're on fixed incomes, things like that.
I don't think that these two issues are mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. So this particular program, we can talk about it, what its motivation was and what it is likely to achieve, was sort of aimed at, so placating in some sense the middle class. And the middle class, given the experience of the 2011 protest, consists of basically people that work, so younger working age people, let's say ages 30 to 45, with two children, from the 6th, 7th, 8th decile of the income distribution. So I think the politicians were afraid that the events of 2011 will recur. So their goal was, first of all, to see to it that it doesn't. And that's why they targeted foremost that particular group. So the program was not aimed at helping people at the lower end of the income distribution, neither also the elderly. So these are issues that need to be addressed separately, and probably they will eventually.
All right, Dr. Coleman, I want to bring you in. For those who are eligible, how much can this program really help then, especially as gas, certain consumer goods, and other costs are remaining high or even rising?
Well, originally the idea was not to have such a program at all, because the way the Minister of Economics is looking at it, the country is in a big deficit following the pandemic, and he wants basically the country to get out of this deficit. So he was not into easing, only there were two surprises. First of all, the gods love us, and surprisingly enough, taxes in just January were significantly higher than in the previous January. So it's always good when the gods love you. And second of all, there was outcry and protest in the public. So they came up with a program which is basically a Band-Aid. What I like about this program, if you look at it from an economic or financial point of view, you say, I'm paying money. What do I get in return? And what he wants to get in return is to cause religious Jews who are not working, and also Arabs who are not working out of choice, to go back into the working circles. This is the major objective. So for that reason, he's aiming at this population. And I like it very much because he's aiming at the lower levels of the working public. And these are levels that, as we know from the States, particularly, people work hard, and find it very difficult to survive. So by focusing on this level with the negative taxes, with assistance in terms of having children, etc., I think it's an excellent approach. Is it a solution in the long term? Not at all, because it's a Band-Aid. So a Band-Aid would never change your life. So that's it.
So Professor Bental, I mean, similar question. You know, some of these subsidies really only come out even after you factor in certain number of children, et cetera. Some of these subsidies only come out to $30, $40, $50 a month. Is this program really all that much to write home about? I mean, how much is it really going to change the lives of those who are eligible to benefit from it?
You're right. I think that was not. First of all, I agree, and with the comment that this program aims at encouraging participation in the labor market, in particular, again, at sort of the lower end, because people at the higher end, of course, don't care much about these, measures. At the margin, it may help. If you think, given the experience of the 2003 reform, led by Benjamin Netanyahu at the time as Minister of Finance, that program did have a major impact on labor force participation, particularly of people, again, at the lower end. And it wasn't much bigger, I think, than the one that we are talking about right now. So the extensive margin, as we call it, this decision of whether or not to join the labor market may be affected, again, at that lower end, even by the measures that have been taken. But time will tell.
All right, well, what about just increasing the minimum wage? We had a former chair of the National Economic Council, Professor Avi Simchon, with us last week to discuss this similar topic, and he suggests that if we just raise the national minimum wage, then that will keep up with inflation, that will pull people out of a lot of their issues. What do you say to this suggestion?
I cannot agree with Simchon about anything, not even about time of day. Simchon is, okay. My point is that by raising the minimum wage, the burden goes over the employers. So now the employers are facing the dilemma, should I actually employ a couple more people in my factory, say, to do the packaging, or should I buy a robot that can do the same thing? So this is a basic economic decision. I think that the current solution, I prefer it because the burden is on the government, not on the small employers. And so we want to have more people brought into the circle of labor. So I prefer the solution to Simchon's statement.
Professor Bental, how do you respond?
Yeah, sure. Coming back to this minimum wage issue. So there are studies, actually very famous ones and somewhat, of course, controversial, in the United States that raising the minimum wage is not going to affect anything. So it is really basically a redistribution of income, right? So if indeed the weaker elements of the working population have a weak bargaining position vis-a-vis the employers, then, sort of a government intervention is implicitly raising the bargaining power. So it comes and in their favor, right? Actually, at the expense, of course, of the employer. But in the final analysis, it is not affecting much else. And basically, of course, the idea, once again, of getting people into the labor market is probably more important than any other consideration. And here again is a step that was not major by any account, but may again help encourage people to join the labor market.
All right. So what happens when the pendulum swings the other way? Because we have already been in a deficit. We have growing costs because of the pandemic and from all of the elections that we had here, the serial elections. So if the government is saying that they're going to subsidize certain payments, they're going to lift the burden from X amount of taxpayers, where's that money coming from?
Well, I guess the solution is going to be that rather than getting out of the debt fast as the finance minister originally planned, it's going to take longer. So now, taking longer is not good news because we see inflation rising in the world. If inflation rises, interest rates will rise as a result. And this means that the debt would be more expensive. So yes, it would be advantageous to get out of debt as fast as possible. But at the same time, I think it's good to have an incentive for these populations to join the labor market and to ease on these weaker populations. I think there's no criticism about this point, except for, as we said before, these are really mild measures. But I think that, yes, if you raised taxes on very high income individuals, that would, of course, ease on the deficit. If we actually got the money that I was expecting to get from our gas, which I do not see for some reason, and I'm really frustrated by that fact, this would, of course, ease on our deficit. So there are several measures that could have been done that I hope in the future will take place.
Professor?
Let me just add on this point on deficit and debt. So it is true, of course, that with inflation rising, probably interest rates, short run, interest rates are going to rise. We are talking right now, as we speak, about a long run interest rate on Israeli debt of about 1%. So this is amazing, right? And this is historically low, I mean, by far. And if you take that into account, then, the burden of the interest payments on the budget or out of GDP is really lower than it used to be when the deficit was, or the debt was relative to GDP at 60% in the, 10 years ago. So in some sense, this issue is not as critical as it used to be. And at least people of my age are thinking in terms of or tend to be thinking in terms of the Maastricht Agreement. But the environment has radically changed since these agreements, right, about 30 years ago. And that needs to be taken into account. And again, economists continue to project very low long-run interest rates into the foreseeable future.
So I want to bring it back again to the individual, though, because we're talking about these rising interest rates. We're talking about the rising cost of inflation. The only thing that hasn't risen, really, is the minimum wage. In years, the average wage in Israel has not gone up, with the exception of the high-tech industry. So how is any of this going to be a sustainable growth when, at the end of the day, we need citizens to have more money in their pocket?
Well, what you're looking at is your buying power. Okay, so you look for a certain salary, what can you afford, okay, in terms of food, lodging, etc. And one of the things, a solution which is completely the opposite of raising the minimum wage, would be to make things less expensive in Israel. And for this to happen, you need to encourage competition.
Right.
Regarding competition, this government was very good at bark, was very pathetic at bite. What I mean is that they talked about encouraging competition, they threatened the big importers, etc. So they made a lot of noise. But at the bottom line, they did not really act to increase competition. In particularly, I'm furious about the fact that they just passed now the ability for brand managers to enforce a minimum price for their product. So if I import a certain shampoo, I can prevent the stores from selling the shampoo at a lower price than the one I dictate. This is a very bad decision and is completely against the direction that was mentioned by the government, because it means that I say, if you just showed Bamba, if I'm selling Bamba, I can make sure that the stores would not sell Bamba at a lower price than one that I set. This is very bad because it prevents discounters from cutting the price. And I think that the government should be more active, again, not at the minimum wage. The government should be much more aggressive at enhancing competition through easing bureaucracy, making it easy for many, many people to import in parallel. So to bypass, the problem is that you have the formal importer of, say, Toyota, and you want to bring Toyotas from countries where they are less expensive. The same thing for shampoos, what have you. And I do not see the government is talking the right talk, but not walking the walk.
So, Professor Bental, what needs to happen? Does Israel have any recourse really here if they're allowing importers, to set their own prices here? Where is the even remote equivalent of an antitrust law here in Israel that the consumers, that the people, that the public and ultimately the government can rely on.
No, on paper, we do have one. The question is, of course, that of enforcement, right? And I fully agree that the issue is that of implementation. And this is not going to be easy because there are two sides to this, problematic situation. On the one hand, of course, you have the people who have the interest, right, in sort of keeping control over the market. So these are the big importers of, in particular, food items. On the other hand, and this is, of course, where the government comes in, the government is giving in to lobbies. And this has been the case now for decades. So the Ministry of Agriculture, in some sense, is representing farmers and et cetera, right? And the Ministry of Industry is representing industrialists rather than the consumers. Again, the verbal statements indeed go in the opposite direction. And I happen to have met Prime Minister Bennett, face to face, and we were talking about that issue. And just as he said in public, he seems to be committed to really change the environment. But again, this remains to be seen whether they will be able to withstand all the pressures and carry out this policy.
Are these special interests, the ministers looking out for the industry insiders, is that borderline criminal? Are we talking about corruption here, or are you talking about something that's gray area but legal?
It's legal mafia in the sense that, first of all, it is legal. So you have a group that makes sure that, for instance, I cannot grow cows in my living room. So there are quotas for milk, there are quotas for chickens, and there are quotas for bees. And it's astonishing. If you want to have a beehive in your backyard, you need the mafia to authorize you to do that. And you need to promise that you would not actually sell it or whatever. This is ridiculous. And the fact that the government is not, so these cartels are legal. They are historically from periods when the farmers were very, very powerful. And these cartels, or mafias, if you want to call them, should be demolished so that at least supply in Israel should be flexible. If prices go up for honey, I should be able to make honey. And the same thing for eggs and milk. And I have no idea why the government is not much more forceful in this direction.
So why, or rather, I'll guess this, I'll restate. How then would you compare Israel's economy, the health of the economy, the strength of the economy, to those of the OECD, particularly as Israeli ministers are constantly saying that we're doing relatively better than they are. Yet here locally, I think the majority of the public doesn't feel that we're doing better than the majority of the OECD. Professor?
Yeah, well, the situation is, of course, that we are not the richest OECD country. So even objectively, this is not quite right. We are doing well, relatively speaking, in sort of dealing with the latest crisis with with pandemic. That is indeed true, although also many other OECD countries have come out of this crisis relatively quickly, much more or much quicker than originally predicted. We have, of course, the high-tech sector. You mentioned it in passing before. Yeah. And it is sort of distorting the view of the Israeli economy. And I think also the Secretary General of the OECD mentioned that.
Yeah, if you adjust for their income, we're really not doing anywhere near as well as some of these numbers would suggest.
That's exactly the case. And when you compare productivity of non-high-tech sectors in Israel to that of other OECD countries, we are really, really doing badly. So we have fundamental problems in the economy regarding so the quality of the labor force, human capital, also physical capital, public capital. All of that we are lagging behind in a big way.
So, all right. So, Dr. Cohen, again, then we talked about rising costs and increasing competition, maybe getting some people to increase their income wages, although you both seem to be a little bit against that as a governmental rule. At the end of the day, bottom line, what can be done in the immediate future to help solve this crisis? Do you think that this deal is that answer?
Well, there are two directions. There's supply and there's demand. It's a very simple issue. So first of all, you need to make supply much, much, much more competitive. And that's when we talked about increasing competition, for prohibiting importers from fixing prices, etc., and enabling, reducing the bureaucracy so you get more players in this arena. On the side of demand, we should be much more vigilant in the sense that Israelis are basically complacent. You would not see Israelis get on a car and drive many miles to a store that has a double coupon deal or whatever. So Israeli demand is complacent, and Israelis should be much more furious. And we saw this in the past when there was fury about the price of cottage cheese and other food items, and Israelis boycotted Tnuva, which is the dairy company, and it was very, very effective. And recently, Israelis boycotted pasta, Osem's pasta, and the sales declined dramatically. So again, the point is not to fight the whole world, is to find one vulnerable company and devastate it so that all the other companies would wet their pants and reduce prices.
All right, Professor Benjamin Bental and Dr. Alex Cohen, thank you both so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to discuss with you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and everybody at home, remember that I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you so much for joining me again on this week's Insider. Please tune in next time on Insider for more on everything Israel, and if there's a topic that you would like us to cover next, let us know about it in the comment sections online. And finally, for more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv and sign up for our brand new streaming platform, ILTV Plus. Thank you so much. Be well, and we'll see you soon.